Hey guys, and welcome to Through Flood and Flame. And all my ambition of when I was preparing for your classes this week, I wanted to do all of William Lithgow in one video, and that is a big fat lie because there's a bazillions of pages. So what we're gonna do is break it down into two parts. Okay, but I don't want to do it in two parts in 2 weeks because that just seems like craziness. So I'm going to include the rest of this video, the rest of the story in tomorrow's English, okay? Because even though it says grammar, it's going to be a little bit different tomorrow anyway. Okay, so here we go. William Lithgow. This is on page 67. It's a British traveler tortured by the Inquisition, okay? So let's see what happens. The Turks are coming. It was midnight of October 27th, 1620, when this news was brought to the governor of Malaga. Now, if you think about 1620, that's actually also the year that the Puritans were getting to Plymouth, United States. The Puritans were leaving this part of the world, too, because of all the persecution and going into the New World. Just so you know that part. The fleet of the dreaded Turks had, he was told, crept in under cover of darkness and was now at anchor off the town. Instantly, the governor ordered the call to arms to be sounded. The castle bells were rung backwards, drums were beaten, and in a few minutes, the town was in an uproar. Okay, who are the Turks? They're from Turkey, okay? The Turks are coming was a cry that filled the Spaniards with dismay. For they knew that if the enemy were victorious, no mercy would be shown to men, women, or children. Mohammedans, those are look what it says right here, the Muslim followers of Islam, the false religion of Muhammad, okay? As well as Protestant and Jews have been tortured on the rack and burnt at the stake by the fiendish Inquisition. So look, the Inquisition was after the Muslims as well. Anything that wasn't Catholicism, right? And the Turks, fired by a desire for revenge and believing themselves to be engaged in a holy war, would pay no respect to sex or age. To afford the women and children as much protection as possible, the governor ordered that they should be removed to a castle some little distance inland. Okay, so they're trying to save the women and the children. While the Turks are coming because the Turks are ready for revenge. Because it must have been that the Spaniards, we know that the Spaniards were the ones controlling the Inquisition at this time because that's what we're studying, the Spanish Inquisition. And so they're ready to take revenge on the Turks, Protestants, Mohammedans, and Jews getting tortured. While the terrified women and children were hurrying to the place of refuge, arms were served out to all the male inhabitants, armas, right, who were capable of striking a blow in defense of the town. Among those who received arms was William Lithgow, a Scotchman, okay, so he was from Scotland, 38 years of age, who had arrived 5 days previously. He had just gotten there. He was a man of means. That means that he was pretty rich. He had resources. And for pleasure, he was traveling on foot through the countries of Europe. From Malaga, he intended to proceed to Alexandria and had booked a passage on a boat that was to sail in a few days. Okay, so he was just there on vacation. The arrival of the Turks threatened to upset his plans, and he was no doubt as anxious as any Spaniard that a crushing defeat should be speedily inflicted upon the invaders. Hour after hour passed, but the expected attack upon the town was not begun. At last, day dawned. So they were waiting for this thing, but they didn't come attack. They were on their way, but they didn't come attack. And by the faint morning light, the weary but alert watchers discovered, greatly to their relief, that the ships which had caused consternation in the town were a portion of the British fleet. England and Spain were at peace, and consequently the British ships could have no unfriendly designs upon the town. It wasn't even the Turks, you guys. Okay, they got all scared, and it was just some British ships going by. Later in the morning, the governor of Malaga went aboard the admiral's ship, and after a short stay during which the usual compliments were exchanged, returned to land and dismissed the armed men to their homes. Okay, you can go. False alarm. Okay, there's no attack. The women and children came hurrying back from the castle, and there was more happiness in the town than there would have been had a battle been fought and won. In the afternoon, a large number of the British sailors came ashore to see the sights, and William Lithgow, discovering some friends among the officers, spent the remainder of the day in their society. 2 days later, Lithgow went out to the fleet and was entertained by the admiral. Okay, so he stayed a little bit while here so he could spend time with his British friends. He remained aboard until the following morning, when as the fleet, which is a group of ships, by the way, was about to depart, he went ashore in a fishing boat. That night he was to sail for Alexandria, but while he was passing along a narrow, deserted street, on the way to his lodgings, 9 men sprang out upon him and seized him. Okay, they kidnapped him. One, to prevent his crying out, gripped him tightly by the throat. Then, lest he should be recognized, a deep black cloak, okay, a bag basically, a cloak is like a jacket, was thrown around him, and taking him up in their arms, the men carried him to the governor's house. On the governor entering the room in which he was detained, Lithgow begged to be told the reason of his arrest, but the Spaniard refused to give any explanation. Okay, so look, as far as we know in the story, he was just there spending time with his British friends. He got off the boat. He was going to go to Alexandria the next day, and he got kidnapped and brought to the governor's house. Turning to the men who had arrested Lithgow, he told them that he was now going to Mass, and that until his return, the prisoner was to be shut up in a cupboard in the room in which they were assembled. Okay, so the governor is going to leave and just keep him there. He also commanded them, just so he can go to culto, Mass, right? He also commanded them to fetch the captain of the town, the chief justice, and the official writer, and warned them that if they told anyone of the Englishman's arrest, they would be executed promptly. This is some serious business. The governor then departed, and Lithgow was at once shut up in a covered prison. The reason of his arrest was a complete mystery to him. Truly, he was a Protestant, but he had never, during his travels, denounced Roman Catholicism, nor done anything which could give the Spanish Inquisition a pretext for arresting him. Okay, so he was a Protestant. Listen to that. Somehow they figured it out, right? Moreover, he had heard that a clause in the last Anglo-Spanish treaty forbade Spain to allow any British subject to be tried by the Inquisition. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, so they weren't allowed to bring the British in front of the Inquisition, but do you think that stopped them? Let's see what they're going to do. The captain of the town, the chief justice, and the official writer were awaiting the governor on his return from Mass, and preparations for the examination of the prisoner were at once begun. The men who had arrested Lithgow were dismissed, and the doors of the room locked. Then the prisoner was brought from his place of confinement and questioned as to the land of his birth, when he left it, and how long he had been in Spain. Lithgow answered the questions without hesitation, his replies being taken down by the writer. He didn't have anything to hide there. He was then put back into his prison, but he had only been there only a few minutes when the captain of the town came to him, and in a friendly tone advised him to confess that he had been living for a time in Seville. Lithgow denied that he had ever been in Seville, but the captain, disbelieving him, warned him that it would be better for him to tell the truth at once. What's going on here? And with this admonition, he brought him again before the examiners, who questioned him closely concerning the movements of the British fleet which he had sailed that morning. They inquired why the fleet had come to Malaga and the reason of the admiral's refusal to come ashore. Gosh, what did he know about it? He was just spending time with them, right? Lithgow replied that he was unable to answer either of these questions. Then he was asked if he knew that the fleet was coming to Malaga, and answered that he did not, whereupon his examiners laughed loudly. The governor soon ceased his ironical laughter and, with many oaths, declared that Lithgow was a spy. He accused him of having lived for 9 months in Seville to obtain information as to the probable date when the Spanish treasure ships would arrive from the Indies, and of coming to Malaga to wait for the arrival of the British fleet. They're like making this whole story up. I wonder why. He had given the admiral the information he had obtained as a spy, and the fleet had departed to waylay the Spanish ships. Lithgow protested that he was not a spy and declared again that he knew nothing of the fleet's intention to anchor off Malaga. Then he suggested that the British merchants in Malaga should be questioned concerning him. But to this the governor replied that Lutherans and sons of the devil ought to receive no credit from good Catholics. So it comes back to religion, right? It now seemed to Lithgow that the Spaniards were determined to condemn him as a spy and would not allow him to a fair trial. Still, he had one more effort to convince them of his innocence. He asked them to send to his lodging for his papers, among which were several safe conducts and various other documents which would prove where he had been during his travels. The papers were fetched, but they served only to increase Spaniards' suspicions. Lithgow had kept a journal during his travels, in which he recorded full particulars of the places he had visited and the sights he had seen. And although the Spaniards, not knowing English, could not read its contents, they impounded it, together with Lithgow's other papers. Further efforts to make Lithgow confess that he was a spy being unsuccessful, the governor commanded his men to remove the prisoner to another part of the place and guard him closely. Before leaving him in his new prison, he was searched and his money, 540 ducats, taken from him. 200 ducats were given to a Capuchin monastery, then in course of erection, and the remainder was appropriated by the governor. Until midnight, Lithgow was unmolested. Then now we talked about that word, it's not used commonly anymore, but it comes from Spanish as well. Okay, they didn't bother him. Then some of the men who had arrested him entered his prison, accompanied by 2 Turkish slaves, and removed him to a room in a quiet corner of the palace, from which no sound could reach the road. There he was thrown on his back and heavy irons placed on him, so that he could neither sit up nor stand, but was compelled to lie on his back, like the rack, right? It was a cruel punishment, but light compared with those he was doomed to endure later. On the following day, the governor visited Lithgow and promised to procure his pardon if he confessed that he was a spy. And when the prisoner once again protested that he was innocent, he vowed that he would soon find means to make him admit his guilt. There and then he ordered the slave who had charge of Lithgow to reduce the prisoner's food to 3 ounces of brown bread and a pint of water every second day. He forbade the slave to speak to him or to give him a pillow for his head or a coverlet when the weather was cold. The windows were then built up until not a ray of light could enter the room. Day after day, the poor prisoner lay on his back in the darkened room, neither seeing nor hearing anyone, except at long intervals when the slave entered to give him his bread and water. He implored the slave to make known to the British consul that he was a prisoner, but the man declared that to do so would be more than his life was worth. He knew that the British would come help him, but nobody was going to tell the British that he was there, right? Days and weeks passed. Still, Lithgow was a prisoner, but at 2 o'clock in the morning of the 47th day of his imprisonment, 47 days, 9 men entered his room and, lifting him, still ironed, carried him from the palace and placed him at full length in a coach that was standing in the roadway. 2 of the men entered the vehicle. The others walked by its side. Lithgow knew that he was being removed to a place of torture. Although the men who guarded him refused to give him any information concerning their destination. It must have been a terrible experience for this once strong and healthy Scotchman, to know that he was being taken to the torturers, and to be unable to struggle for liberty. To shout for help would, he knew, be useless, for the streets were deserted. At length, the coach stopped at a vineyard some distance from the town, and Lithgow was at once carried into a press house and locked up in one of the rooms until daylight. Then he was borne into a room where the captain and the chief justice were sitting at a table, with paper, pens, and ink before them. Once again, Lithgow was urged to confess that he was a spy, and once more he protested that he was not. Then, finding the prisoner could not be prevailed upon to confess, the captain drew up a warrant authorizing the chief justice to torture him. Lithgow was at once carried into the room where the rack was kept, the chief justice and his clerk following. The official torturer began his duties by roughly striking the irons from his victim's feet. The irons having been removed, Lithgow was placed upon his feet, but he was so terribly weak, for he had tasted neither food nor water for 3 days, that he fell to the ground where he lay, as he relates in the account of his travels, crying to God to save him. The torturer now stripped him and placed him upon the rack, but to describe the agonies which he underwent would be too harrowing. At length, you can't describe it, okay? It's too horrible, is what they're saying. At length, Lithgow was taken from the rack and laid upon the floor, the chief justice urging him to confess that he was a spy, and vowing that if he did not, he should suffer still worse torture. I am innocent, Lithgow answered. O Jesus, the Lamb of God, have mercy upon me, and strengthen me with patience to undergo this barbarous murder. Again he was placed on the rack, which was now in a slanting position, his head downward and his feet upward, and as he lay there on his back, many ghastly forms of torture were inflicted upon him. At last, when the poor prisoner had been altogether 6 hours on the rack and had undergone 67 different kinds of torture, he was released. 67 different kinds of torture. His maimed and bleeding body having been covered and the irons replaced on his mangled feet, he was carried to the coach and taken back to the place during the night. There he was placed in the prison which he had occupied for 47 days, and in the morning the governor visited him to urge him to confess and to threaten him with further torture if he did not. But although Lithgow was suffering indescribable agony, he would not gratify the governor by falsely stating that he was a spy. He fully expected that he would be again racked, and was agreeably surprised to find as the time passed that he was left unmolested in his dark prison. He did not know that the governor had at last satisfied himself that the man whom he had so barbarously eluded was not a spy. So we'll see what happens tomorrow, now knowing that he was not a spy. What I want you to do today is write 5 main events from this part. 5 main events from this part, because you're going to summarize it at the end, right? And also tell me, what is your opinion? Why do you think that they were so focused on making him confess that he was a spy, even though there wasn't really no evidence of that? Weird. There you go. See you tomorrow back with the story.